quickly, while we wait for some people to log in, I'm Rick Montanez. I'm the secretary with SPJ LA. I'm also a reporter for the CBS station here in LA, a morning reporter who's out and covering those devastating wildfires that bring us here to the webinar today. And so glad you guys are here with us. We've got some great conversations lined up, and I will introduce our guests here in just a moment. It looks like we've got more people coming in, so great. Okay, well, let me start with an introduction for our guests, because I greatly appreciate your expertise and your willingness to be here with us. And so first up, we have Anastasia Bolton, who is I see 7-time Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist. So you know, yes. And so you're a celebrated journalist who has been through a lot. You've seen a lot in your time in the field and over the course of your 2-decade career. Now you help with media coaching, you do communications, crisis communications, but you've also kind of been through the trauma of covering devastating events in your covering several markets that you've worked in. And so we'll talk with you about what has come up for you in your career, how you've helped your colleagues, how you helped yourself, and kind of what these experiences mean and what we can look for and help each other with. And then our other panelist is Traute Winters, who is with us. She's the executive director for NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness for the Greater Los Angeles County area. And we appreciate having you here with us as well. She's going to share with us a lot of resources for how we can recognize if we are dealing with PTSD within ourselves or our colleagues or friends, how we can find help, whether it's someone we need to talk with in person, things we can read on how to help us recenter, what we should do to protect ourselves essentially. And so I appreciate both of you for being with us, and I think we're going to have a great conversation here. I also want to start with the fact that we are doing this tonight. Our board was so gracious to help get this organized. I had asked them to look into this as a possibility, and they carried on the conversation. I wasn't able to be at that meeting because that was the first weekend that I was able to take extended time away from work after the fires, and it was so necessary for me because I'll be frank, I struggled a lot after covering the fires, and still do sometimes. So, you know, I want us to all be able to have this conversation so that we can figure out ways to move forward as healthy journalists to continue our important work. Anastasia, we were just talking before we started how you feel like I can't step away because I have to do this work. This is so critical. As journalists, we feel like that. We feel like, how can I step back? I can't be the one traumatized because it's not about me. It's about the story. It's about the people I'm covering. So if you would start explaining to us a little bit about how you've seen some of this trauma, maybe some of the events you've covered, and where it's taken you, what you've felt along the way.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being vulnerable, right? Like, vulnerability is hard. We ask people to be vulnerable with us, and we know people struggle. So I appreciate you so much. So the way that I ended up here really was the Aurora Theater shooting was the beginning for me. And for those who are maybe younger in this group and they may not remember, it's 12 people killed and 70 injured in the Aurora, Colorado movie theater in 2012. And I worked in Denver for 12 years of my 22 plus year career. And that I was designated the crime and justice reporter. So right before Aurora happened, I already did crime day in and day out. So it was bad things and, you know, dead people all the time. And I casually talk about it because that's really how it was, right? And then Aurora happened and something switched. I think it was just too many at the same time, right? And I did not realize the effect that would have on me over time. And then you layer on that, there were other events that happened in Aurora with children being murdered. And then I did a number of other mass casualty events, including a church in Sutherland Springs outside of San Antonio. So it's just this repeated over and over and over trauma that really, I feel like it was just crushing my soul. But like in the beginning, when we talked, mentioned Aurora, the first 3 days, I was just on autopilot, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're there, you're doing whatever double shift, whatever needs to happen, right, to cover the story. And so at the end of day 3, I think I called one of my friends, and I was crying, and I was like, why, right? Like I could not grasp why this happened, why somebody would do something like this. And at the moment that you start asking that why in a tragedy like this, I was told that is your sort of your gateway. You need to go see somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend said, either I'm making an appointment for you or you're gonna. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I don't have time. I'm going to be on this. I have so much knowledge already in the community because I've been living in the Denver area for a long time. In fact, Aurora, that was my movie theater, right?
Yeah.
I was so removed mentally from what happened there for the first 3 days to hyper focus on the victims and the people and what happened, that only 3 days in, I remember that my husband wanted to go to this movie. During that time, it was the opening night, and that was the opening movie, right? He wanted to go. I was off on Fridays. So I was the old lady saying, I don't want to go. I have an appointment first thing in the morning. I connected the dots later. So I was really obstinate because it, just like you said, it's not about me. I'm the person who knows the story best. Taking a day off will absolutely drive me insane.
Mm-hmm.
Bad choice of words, I apologize, but it's not soothing because I'm not there and I'm missing something. So I just eventually got lots of counseling that we'll talk about, but that experience and many others what brings me here today. And I talk about mental health and journalism in every opportunity I get because it's so important.
And so many of us, whether it's broadcast, print, radio, television, digital, whatever our outlet is that we work for, we feel that obligation to our audience of, I need to be here and delivering this news, gathering this news, providing this news. And it's not a bad thing. I think so many journalists, we do this because it's a calling. It's something that's in us. It's not just a job. So that's why we feel so pulled to this. But then, like you mentioned, you get to that point where you start feeling, and it starts coming out, and sometimes it floods out. And, one of the things that I will share is that covering the fires, I was doing this on the air, on television for hours on end, and I was watching places that I was familiar with burn to the ground completely, and seeing houses that caught fire, and within 20, 30 minutes, they were just flattened. I mean, we all have seen house fires. We've responded to them. We've covered them.
Yeah.
You see them burn, and they get put out, and it's like, oh, they have damage. They'll fix it. It's fine. But to see homes burn, just neighborhoods leveled so quickly, that was what was so different. And then for me, it wasn't even because I covered Aurora. I flew out there. I was working with a station in Fresno, and I flew out there to cover it. So that was the first time that I had a moment of, wow, this is really deeply affecting me, and I need to figure out how to process this. But with the fires, I started processing it all on the air, and it just was coming out. And our anchors were fantastic in being like, take the moment, catch your breath. I saw places that were important to my family that we had years of family celebrations and weddings and things like that just burned down. And so that was all happening real time. My emotions were happening real time. And so I wasn't able to disconnect. It was just happening. And so, there's so much of that whether it's later or it's happening in the moment, for a lot of us, it's happening at some
Mm-hmm.
point,
Yes.
and we need to find ways to kind of work through it.
Yeah, we got to talk about it. We got to acknowledge it. Got to find safe spaces to talk about it. I mean, if you don't feel like you can go to a professional, who I highly recommend,
Mm-hmm.
talk to a friend first. Um, and I have known people who are like, well, I don't like a counselor, or I can't afford one, or I went to one, I didn't like it. One of the biggest lessons that I learned actually from one of the Aurora families, their daughter was killed in the shooting. They said to me, Anastasia, finding a counselor is like dating. You go, you see them, you like them, great, you can come back. If not, you have to keep trying it more again and again. That is the only way, really, sometimes for some people, to find a path forward.
Right, and if people haven't done that before, then it's a learning curve to
Yep.
understand that. So, Traute, I want to bring you into this because I know you have some resources for us and some information that you've prepared to help us with what we should look for, with ways we can get that help that we need, avenues that we can explore for finding resources for ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to post some of these in the chat, but I want to start out with just giving a brief overview of NAMI, because I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with NAMI, but we're the nation's leading mental health organization that is run by peers. So we're not mental health professionals. We're all of our programs, we have support groups and classes and education programs in the school are run by people who live with a mental health condition, as well as those who support them. So we have support groups for people who live with a mental health condition, and the leaders are highly trained, as well as for those who support them. So I like to tell people we're kind of like the AA Al-Anon of mental health, although our folks, do go through a training and we do have regular leaders. I did post a bunch of resources. I'm not sure if they did, if they're going to come through separately, because it's like, 7 or 8 different
Yeah, I see links here in the chat.
resources. But if it's okay, I'll share some of them.
Yes, please.
And again, thank you to all of you who covered the fires. I was glued to my TV and I was traumatized just watching some of the journalists, and afraid, that how close you were to the fires. And, I think the media community did an amazing job, and, it was definitely traumatizing for all of us. And, watching or reading, and, so thank you for all that you did. And, in talking with Rick, when he asked me to be here, I realized what you guys are going through is very similar to what first responders are going through as well. And NAMI does have a program for first responders, a lot of anonymous resources and support groups. But what I want to share with you, and what I posted in the links, is a little bit of our resources, our trauma resources. So are you guys seeing this first page right here?
Yes.
About supporting your mental health after a trauma and building a trauma-informed workplace. So, it talks a little bit about what is trauma, tips for supporting your mental health during difficult times, and how to talk about trauma in the workplace, as well as resources. So we have a warm line, and we also have helplines run by peers. A warm line is a little different than a helpline. A helpline will give you, primarily resources and connect you with our programs. A warm line is just if you need someone to talk to. So, you've had a stressful day, you're experiencing anxiety, and you want someone, who also lives with those types of conditions. We have a warm line that you can call, and you can call it every day if you want. You know, we have people that call on a regular basis, and that's available to the community, as well as 988. Hopefully everyone's familiar with that. That's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. SAMHSA has a helpline, or a disaster helpline, that for if you're experiencing emotional distress because of a human caused disaster, this is 24/7. It's crisis counselors who are experienced in trauma. So, you know, that's 24/7. If you just need someone to talk to, you know, here's the number for that. You know, looking at what are some of the symptoms, recognizing in yourself and others. You know, if you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious or irritable, you know, behavior that's not normal for you, or confused, or, you know, you're withdrawing, you're having trouble concentrating, you know, those are times to definitely reach out. We have the 7 tools for managing traumatic stress, and, you know, some of the tools that you can use, you know, to really manage some of that as well. Here's an article about, you know, experiencing stress related to trauma or mass violence. You know, what are ways that you can support yourself? You know, the behavior, you know, when you're experiencing a trauma, your reaction, you know, that's normal to feel distress, and, you know, acknowledging how you're feeling, seeking support from others, whether it's a professional. I mean, the unfortunate thing in our country is we have a shortage of mental health professionals, and it's not always easy to find someone, you know, that, first of all, that you connect with, but even just to find someone that's available. So, you know, that's where NAMI, we feel, you know, we also come into play with our support groups and our warm lines. You know, we're complementary to other forms of support, but, you know, that seeking support from a peer or others, you know, that can be helpful. You know, engaging in activities outside of work, you know, spirituality is a protective factor. Here's some other resources as well, and other types of therapy, you know, EMDR, you know, how to find someone with that type of therapy. So resources here. Again, that hopefully you can find these links in the chat, and I can also share them as well with Rick to send out. But, you know, supporting a loved one as well, building resilience and mental wellness in the workplace, you know, information about that. Tips if you're a manager for having a conversation and how to start a conversation with others, you know, words to validate someone's mental health concern. And, you know, here's something about words matter, you know, talking about mental health and navigating a mental health crisis at work. So a lot of different resources. You know, here's the guide about supporting your mental health after a trauma, again, with more resources, and you know, how to validate, you know, your feelings, and when, you know, they are concerning and you should seek that extra help. 3 ways traumatic stress presents and how to manage it, how you can get support for PTSD. And then we have a guide, which is right here, about navigating a mental health crisis, and, you know, developing a crisis plan so that when you need it, it's there, along with medical history as well. And then this is on our website, namiglac.org, the resource, the trauma resources that we put together right after the fire. And again, it has the SAMHSA disaster distress helpline that's 24/7, 988 suicide and crisis line. This is our local NAMI GLAC Connect with Home warm line, and then other resources, both in English and Spanish. And then just this is all the resources we put together for first responders, but I think, you know, some of this can also be relevant as well to the media community.
Well, thank you so much for all of those resources. That's fantastic. It is in the chat. I dropped it in there so that everyone can see it. And then to our guests, we also have Q&A open right now. So if there's anything you guys want to reach out, a few of you have already asked a couple of questions. That's how somebody brought up that the chat wasn't open to everybody at first, but we've solved that. And I appreciate you sharing and cultivating so many resources for people. I think that might be one of the big factors for a lot of people maybe not seeking professional help, or you know, they maybe feel like they don't know where to look. Quite frankly, if my boss hadn't sent out multiple emails saying, here are the resources we have available for you through the company, I might not have reached out to someone as quickly. You know, so it's all helpful to know that it's just at our fingertips. And I'm pretty sure if we, you know, if you, as an attendee, if you don't see these links or something, if you just search NAMI, you'll be able to easily navigate and find resources.
Right. On our website, and if you also Google NAMI trauma resources, they'll all come up.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to piggyback off what you were saying, you know, in terms of, you know, your boss sending out an email, like reminding people that resources are available. This is a good time to remind everyone who works in the media, you typically have an HR department, whether it's housed at the station or at the newspaper, wherever you work, or outside, that can provide you these resources. Some companies pay a certain number of counseling sessions. So one of the biggest things that I learned through my experience, and then I worked with SPJ on the national level last year. I chaired a committee with a number of members trying to figure out like what recommendations we can provide as a committee to the industry, right? Like how we can grow and be better at this, right? And one of the biggest takeaways was we have to be our own advocates. We're advocates for the community, which is our job, and it's noble and it gives me goosebumps. That's like one of the things that I miss for not doing this work anymore, right? But we have to be our own advocates. We ask the questions to the politicians, to people in authority, to people on the street. We need to ask the questions of our news directors, HR managers. Listen, who can I call? Who do we have? Because I need to go talk to someone. And there's no shame in that. We need to talk about it to remove the stigma. Like, I am not a mental health professional, so I cannot, you know, full disclosure. But I just am a firm believer that if you bring something into the light and more people talk about it, we start normalizing the conversation about needing help, and that this profession not only matters, but we need to take care of ourselves, because you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? Is the expression.
Exactly. Yeah.
How can you go out and report if you're not well?
Yeah.
Right. And that was one of the reasons I had called out sick that first Monday after the fires, because I knew I could not, my mind wasn't there to be in the job. But then I had that feeling of, but I can't be away.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
I have to be there. I have to be, this is my community. I can't turn my back on the people who need me right now. And so then it was the battle of, how do I care for myself while still doing this work?
Yes. You are giving a gift to your community, I would venture to say, by making sure that you're well, right? Because your community needs you to go out, unfortunately, for however many years to come and talk about the rebuilding and talk about the challenges with insurance and all of the things that are already coming to the forefront. They need you. And the only way but you're going to be able to do that if you're okay.
Yeah.
So you're
And
doing everybody a service.
yeah, for so many of us to take care of ourselves. And, you know, when I reached out to Traute and talked about, this is what I want to have for our panel, for this conversation, for journalists who are going to join us, this critical information, and she right away pointed to these resources and things, and the conversations that we should have, and the things that we could look for. And I think a lot of that is looking for it within ourselves, but also recognizing in the people around us. And that was one thing I will say, here in LA, whether you're newspaper, broadcast, wherever you place your journalism, it is a small community, just like in all the other cities, and we all pretty much know each other. And a lot of us are, you know, hey, how are you? How, you know, like, oh, how has it been? And in those conversations I've had, it's the first time that I really remember from, I mean, I've covered countless other fires. I've covered mass shootings, terror attacks in Southern California. It runs the gamut of traumatic events. But these fires, this is when I started to see this community of journalists really stop and be like, it's bad, you know, and almost have no words. But we all kept asking each other. And I would notice there were a few people who, when I asked them, they were hesitant to respond, but they wanted to ask me and be an ear for me. But, you know, it's important for us to recognize, right, that we're here for everyone else too.
Their capacity is different than yours at this moment. So, yeah.
Let me see. So I have a question here that says, how do you deal with balancing your journalistic duties while identifying with the subject of the story and internalizing their plight? This is from a PR person, and he has had to face this with unnecessary deaths in motion picture production.
I can answer for me, and I'm not here to say that I'm right. For me, I don't know how not to internalize it. Because not only do you listen and people share, and then you go back, as you know, and you listen to it again when you're logging the video and the sound, and then you're listening to it again when you're editing, and then you're like, you know, you are consuming this information over and over again with every single story. I don't know how not to internalize it. I also don't know how not to internalize it as a human, and then as a writer. I don't know how to write a story having not sat with it for a minute and understood what people were communicating with me, their feelings, right, where they're at. That has to be a part of the story. That's what makes the story good, accurate, human. I don't know how not to do that.
Yeah.
It's not a good answer. But if you feel nothing, then your story is going to reflect that.
Right. And, you know, I can, again, answer for myself as well, in that I take it all in because I also try to understand what I'm going to tell my audience. How am I going to present this story? Because in my medium, I am talking about it. I'm choosing which parts of the interview to use, and I'm choosing my words in describing what is going on for this traumatic event.
Yes.
And I've always said I choose my words carefully because it's so critical for us to do that. And I think, you know, that's part of it, is you have to internalize it. You have to take it in and understand how they're feeling to be able to tell that story. And this question, again, comes from someone who says they work in public relations. So, you know, from all of the PR friends that I have, it's storytelling, which is what we do. And you have to understand what people are going through to be able to share their story. and to accurately share their story and to do it justice. I want to toss to Traute and see, one of the things that you and I have talked about is, taking in all these experiences. And so I think really maybe from what you see in terms of how NAMI is operated as people who are trained to help others, and, as you mentioned, not necessarily mental health workers, so your kind of friends that are there for people to help them understand. I mean, what would you say in terms of this question of, we internalize what we see? I mean, essentially that's what it is. It's what we're witnessing. It's what's around us, which I would guess is very similar to people who turn to NAMI because they need help with other, whether it's addiction in their life or violence that has happened, trying to process all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the peer model, which people are speaking from their own experience, strength, and hope, and sharing what's worked for them and sharing resources. Mental health is so difficult to navigate because, the reality is our system's broken. There aren't enough mental health professionals. And that's why the peer model, I think, too, is so important because, who's going to understand someone who's been through it? And, we're developing a lot of support groups right now for different communities because with mental health, too, people want to talk to someone who they can really identify and relate with. That's why we're now looking at developing a support group for first responders run by first responders. We're developing something for the Armenian community, for the Chinese community, because with mental health, people feel it's hard enough to talk about it, with the stigma. They want to talk about it with people from their community. And, just in our conversation, be interesting, to start a support group within the media community, right? Because you guys experience so much. So Anastasia, maybe that's something, that, or, someone from this group might think about doing, because we're all human and we all experience emotions. And what we're going through right now, it's a traumatic time. I mean, not just the fires, but, the world, our country, the world, everyone's, we went through COVID. Now there's so much else happening in the world. It's a traumatic time. And we just need, to be able to recognize that we're all having mental health struggles, right? And, recognizing that we have to prioritize self-care. And that it's a stressful time in everyone's life right now. And so, what can we all do to take a step back, to connect with others and to take care of our own personal mental health?
Yeah, and as journalists, we're reporting on all of these monumental, life-changing, once-in-a-lifetime events that keep happening one after the other, after the other, after the other.
Yeah.
And, so it's traumatic to our family. We see that, right? I mean,
right. Yes.
We see how everyone around us is feeling it. And so we obviously have to be feeling it. Even like you mentioned with COVID just being, we hit I think 5 years yesterday was the mark of it being a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah.
And so there's so much for pretty much everyone to deal with. And one of the things that I will share that came out of my counseling sessions after the fires was he pointed out that I'm dealing with all of my life traumas. I'm dealing with my nearly 2 decades of covering crime and everything else that we see out in the world. And then all of these big moments, these big events that happened over the course of my career that I've been involved in the coverage. And it all compounds for us. And one of the things I want to point out is, so in the question and answer, I got something that says, take a deep breath, remind yourself that the public needs the story from us. That's, of course, like sometimes it's just taking that break away from, your laptop, your notepad, whatever, and collecting yourself and kind of getting back into it. And then it says, you know, the intellectualizing it to the degree that we need to. And I think a lot of journalists are good at compartmentalizing, pack it away for later. I've told myself that at scenes before. And one of my tricks that I learned after covering Aurora, for me, this works for me, and I'm not saying that I don't even know if it's really actually healthy, but I tell my significant other, you know, they know what's going on, what I'm covering, and I say, I'm gonna need a moment tonight, so that he knows when I come home, I'm gonna fall apart because I'm holding it all in while I'm at work, and then I'm gonna have to let it out when I get home. And I'm not asking for necessarily conversation or anything, but just that shoulder. And that's my way of letting it out when I've compartmentalized it and packed away my emotions for later.
It's interesting that you say that, and I love that it works for you. But I wonder, how much detail do you provide your partner of what happened? There's a reason I ask that. Because in one of my counseling sessions, I was told, like, don't provide the gory details to your life partner unless they're prepared to handle them. Because unless they are emotionally, mentally, and in every way prepared to take that and process it, you are absolutely shattering their life, right? Because we keep a lot of details in, don't we? Right? Because some things cannot be repeated out loud. And I had that, like, a secondhand experience on this is that I happened to go on maternity leave during the Aurora Theater trial. And a number of people or my colleagues, you know, stepped in to cover it, which they later, when I came back from maternity leave, they told me never to ever leave ever again, because they did not appreciate having to step into that space. But one of my colleagues said, listen, they were discussing and showing autopsies in court, and I came back and I shared that with my wife, and she had to walk out of the room. She couldn't handle it. I'm like, why did you do that? Call me. She can't. I have somewhat of a place to put that, and we could cry about it together. She has no way, like no skills whatsoever to process that and set it aside. And so that has just been my experience with sort of like let's call them civilian, right? Because we're sort of the first responder people. The civilian population, don't share things that you know that they will not be able to handle at all, because they can't help you. You definitely can't help them. And there's trauma everywhere. So that's just my experience. So how much do you share?
It depends on the topic. I will say that one of the things that I know really he has a hard time with is fire. And so I know that when I leave to an assignment, you know, there was the Franklin fire in Malibu that was in, I believe, November or December. And I was called at 11:30 at night to, you know, get in as early as I could in the morning because we had to relieve the night crew that had been on around the clock. And so I got out of bed. I started getting myself ready. He still hadn't gone to bed for the night. But I knew that for him, he would not sleep because he knew that I was going in the middle of the night to a fire zone. So that already is traumatic for him. You know, so I do try to limit what I share. But I also, you know, it goes to kind of to one of these questions that was just asked about, you know, when we interview people about something sensitive and then they later say, I'm not really comfortable with you sharing all of that. Like, how do we manage that? And I think probably in the same way we manage what we tell, you know, other people. Like, is it important enough to, you know, would it traumatize them? And I will say, with interviewing someone about a sensitive topic and they ask to keep things still private, even though they've already shared it with us, you know, you weigh that, right? Of like, is this going to trauma? Am I going to be the source of trauma to them by putting this in my report?
Mhm.
Is it necessary to include this in the story?
Yeah.
Will harm come to them if I do? You know,
Yes.
and I think
See
that's
this.
kind of along the same lines, right?
Yeah. You know, this one is actually is an easy one for me, and I know it's a hefty ethical question, right, for journalists. Like, how much do we, do we censor, or if you've told me things on the record, it's mine. The record is
Mm-hmm.
mine. The video
Mm-hmm.
is mine. It's on the record, and I have the right. We've agreed. We have this, social contract. It's different for when you talk about with victims and survivors. For me, 100%. If it's politicians, if it's people in position of authority, that's a different conversation. But for victims and survivors of any sort of traumatic event, if they need to walk back what they just said, absolutely. Because to me, the rules are different, and those rules are based in experience. And then if you talk to a professional who teaches trauma informed way of talking to victims and survivors, they are going to tell you, there's such thing as trauma informed journalism, right? And so you respect what victims ask you.
Right, because the way I look at it, and I saw this once where I saw a crew chasing down a victim and their family and repeatedly asking them questions. And my photographer on instinct saw the other crew going after them, and he started to go, and I pulled him back.
Because
do not.
Yeah, nope.
They, as victims and survivors, owe us nothing. Public officials,
Different.
you've seen the coverage of the mayor here in Los Angeles, of the drama with the fire chief being let go. They owe us answers.
Yes.
I believe, can go to them and ask them and demand answers, because they are the public officials who have stepped into this role knowing that they have to answer to the public. Victims and survivors, that's a whole different ballgame, which is the same for these fire victims. I feel there has, over the course of my career, there's been a lot of conversation of, where do we have access to when fires are happening? And as a stage, I know you've been out covering major wildfires. Do we trample through people's properties? Do we sift through their belongings? And I've seen it happen. I've seen it mostly happen when the people invite us in to be on their property, or it's okay for you to go and, do your story here.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is finding these limits, right? Finding these boundaries and setting them so that we are not traumatizing them.
Right. That, that's a difficult thing. It's interesting you mentioned it, sifting through somebody's belongings. It would never occur to me. It just wouldn't. Now, would I go on their property if I'm out in the scene, just like you? And, the last major fire I covered was the Marshall Fire outside of Denver. It burned entire neighborhoods, which now you're living that nightmare, unfortunately. For Colorado, I mean, we've seen mountain fires. This is the first time a city, just an entire city, neighborhoods gone. For us, we don't typically experience that. I walked around that neighborhood that was shared with absolute confidence. I didn't touch anything of anyone's. That's not mine to do. But I felt okay being there. And if I were to be ever asked to leave by a homeowner, no questions asked. Absolutely. I'm out.
Right.
But I don't touch their stuff. So whoever taught me those limits, I don't know. These are sort of, I'm glad we're having these conversations, because who taught you this? Who taught me this?
Right.
It's not journalism school that taught me this.
And you know what? It's not journalism school that taught me mental health and dealing with trauma and coping with trauma on the job, in the field. And I think that's, it's critical that we learn these things and help teach others in our field of how to do all that. I have more questions here. Another one.
I love that transition. That was so smooth. 20 years of journalism, right now, right here.
There it is.
Just beautiful work.
So somebody asked, anger. theirs and yours.
What about it? Showing it?
I think this is from the question before, which Rick, if you wouldn't mind providing some more context, because the way I read it was, how do we deal with, seeing people's anger and dealing with our own anger when we're covering events and we're seeing things that are frustrating? Because I can tell you, seeing all the anger here in LA at the response, at the city, at the county, there was a lot of anger. There is a lot of anger still. And some of it, can come from us sometimes, where it's like, this is not how things should be. Or this is not, you shouldn't be skirting these questions. And sometimes it gets frustrating because we see firsthand what people are going through. We see their trauma and they come to us about it. One of the things that was a struggle for me was, I think it was the third or fourth day after the fire. Neighborhoods were still closed off. They weren't letting anybody up to their homes. Some people were finding ways in, and it was just, people were asking us, begging us to get in our van because we had access. And they wanted us to take them. And we were like, we can't, we're sorry. That's just not, can't do it. But then the anger started boiling over because they just didn't have access and they wanted it. And, sometimes trying to understand that from them or even portray that, I think sometimes, because I was feeling like they're traumatized. So of course, anger is part of that. And then it was like, well, how much of their anger do we put into our reporting? Is it the main part of my story today? Is it a sidebar? Is it a soundbite only? Like, just because these 5 people are angry, does that mean this whole neighborhood is angry? And then it was a lot to be piled on to me, frankly. Like, my photographer and I were saying when we left, like, man, that was rough, because it was person after person after person coming up and sharing how one woman said, I lost my husband a month ago and I lost my house the other day. And now I can't get to my property. And, so it's like all these things compounding on us again that, like, then we have to make those decisions on journalistic, integrity in our stories and what matters and what we need to get into. So those are.
The only easy one for me, because I lived it, was if you're feeling personal anger that you are feeling that you cannot control. And I had that situation. I should have known better and I should have stepped away from that story. I was absolutely incensed about this particular situation. I was assigned to go cover it. I went and did it. And my news director later on, after she had to suspend me, because I popped off at the mouth, as my husband says, she's like, I should have seen it and I should have not let you go do it. I did not see it enough. I was not smart enough, not whatever enough. But I was absolutely outraged. And that blinded me to the point that I could not ask articulate questions during the story. I put the story together. I think the story was balanced. Where I popped off at the mouth was on social media. And I got taken off the crime beat, but for a number of months. But that's my only thing. If you are feeling like you absolutely just cannot see straight, like whatever is happening is so blatantly in your mind, wrong, unfair, whatever the words you want to use that, bring that strong feeling forward, you got to say, you know what, not today. I'm human today. And today I cannot be an unbiased journalist. Right.
Right.
Like I feel strongly.
The objectivity.
I don't have it. Today I don't have it. And I'm sorry. You have to step away.
Yeah. And part of our training as a trauma-informed newsroom that we heard was recognizing that and deciding, even if you don't, they were even telling our managers, if someone, a reporter or a photographer just says, hey, not today, without having to necessarily give the reason, but just saying, I just can't do that one today. We're obviously not going to be like, hey, give me this nice fun feature of, whatever is the easiest story of the day. That probably always have to have some sort of hard news story. That's,
Yeah.
that's journalism right now. And so, but it's having the ability to say that to a manager or somebody, so that but it's hard if you don't recognize it within yourself.
But you also need to be heard, because in 2012, I am 6 months into Aurora. Another thing happened that involved a child. So I'm in the midst of it. An example that I came to my manager and I said, one day, can I just please have one day of no death? Assign me anything you want, which is, if you get something that's garbage, is already a kiss of death, because you're like, oh my God, this is boring. I don't want to do it. But I'm like, I'll do whatever you want. Yeah. The lowest of the low, a restaurant review. Like, we didn't do them, but you know what I'm saying. Like, thing that I will hate, give it to me. Just no death. I am a couple of hours in to my day, and I get a call. Hey, so I need you to go to this 5 people stabbed to death and then burned in a bar. And I'm like, wait a second, this is my one day. What happened to that? And the manager's like, well, it's not Aurora. What?
Wow.
Yes. So you see how far you've come, right? In your newsroom. And I'm absolutely excited about that. Right. But I've had this conversation more than once. So,
and even with having that conversation of our training, that doesn't guarantee that a manager is going to say, because they'll be like, sorry, you're the only one I have.
Right. There's that. And
I have had those weeks. I have had those weeks where I said, just one day without death, please. Literally, that's all I wanted, was one story where someone was not dead.
Well, I'm allowed to ask, and I get it. People work in newsrooms when they're the only reporter on that shift. I get it. I'm just saying, I think what we're saying is, if I may, advocate for yourself, talk to your manager, continue having these conversations with your manager, direct manager to this particular webinar that's being recorded, or any number of things that resources are available for managers. Because the thing is, if people want to keep people working in newsrooms, and we need journalism more than ever, you've got to make it a sustainable workplace. And we know the money is not sustainable. How else are you making it sustainable then?
Yeah, and we have to, like you said, advocate for ourselves in that. Another question that was posed, and I haven't gotten to it yet, but I was wondering, do you separate your own personal traumas or struggles from your work, if you're able to separate them at all? Which I think we've kind of touched on this topic a little bit, where there are times where, no, you can't. And there are times where I think our own personal experience will benefit.
Thank you. Yes.
The coverage.
Yes. I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say the same thing. I think maybe, for just a consideration, in this particular context, trauma, your personal trauma or your personal life experiences, maybe you look at them as an asset. And I say this because for the longest time, I did not know if I wanted to be a mother. I'm like, I don't know if I like children. I work a lot, and I don't want to sacrifice and whatever. And then I became a mother, and he changed the way that I looked at children's stories. Not that I was bad at doing them before, but I felt what a 3-month-old would feel. And I understood what a 1-year-old could do and how they saw the world. I know it made me a better journalist. I'm an immigrant. And when I went and worked on the Texas-Mexico border, I brought that experience, very different, of course, from me and the people who were crossing the Rio Grande. But I brought that experience as to why I wanted to be here, why I chose to live here, and what an honor it was to be here. I brought that, and I used that as an asset. And it guided some of my questions. And I think it made me a better interviewer. if I may be so bold. I'm not without fault by any means, and I think I've shown that, right? But suspended from a beat for 6 months, I think that's a pretty good one. I
But it
think
gives
it
you
makes us
insight.
better. It makes us better.
Mm-hmm.
It makes us better.
Well, in Traute, I want to ask you this because it sounds to me like it's something similar with what NAMI does in terms of, you know, the peers having the experience of maybe I've dealt with this trauma before, so I can help people who are going through it.
Yeah, I mean, they bring their experience, strength, and hope and understanding, so that they can, empathize and, offer how they might have gotten through a situation or handled a situation. And I think that's powerful, knowing that someone truly understands, what you're going through and can offer some suggestions or hope or resources. It's very powerful.
Yeah, and as journalists, then it helps us, like Anastasia said, ask better questions, maybe looking to who in charge you should be asking questions of, just like with these fires, of what do we ask these public officials? What do we ask about, could this have been prevented? How, I mean, one of the things I will point out, in having been a reporter here in LA for about a decade now, I've covered so many fires, and we talk about that on the air. We talk about what we remember from the Woolsey fire, which was in the Malibu area, what we remember from how that fire behaved. How are things changing now? How's the climate different? How is the building of neighborhoods different? How, all these sorts of things, what have we learned from that incident to then now? Which, that's the experience that we get over time of having been through these things. So, while sometimes when I look back on the Woolsey fire, that's a traumatic event for me because, if you're not familiar, the day before that started was the Borderline shooting, which was Borderline Bar and Grill. It was a mass shooting, and we were covering that wall to wall all day long. And I was out there doing live shots after I interviewed somebody who was inside the bar, and I look in the distance and I see smoke. And I called 911 and said, hey, there's some smoke here. And it was a hot and windy day. And 15 hours later, I'm back in that same neighborhood doing live shots with somebody who was loading up horses. And I asked this girl, like, what are you guys doing? Where do you have somewhere to take these animals? And she was like, I am just loading up the horses. My friends died in the shooting. I haven't even processed that. And now our neighborhoods are burning down. Like, of course, that is her personal trauma. But for me as the journalist, I'm hearing that on the air because we were just in wall-to-wall live coverage. That was a moment that I was like, what do I say to her? Like, I can't say anything to make her feel better.
Nope.
I wished her luck, and I said, I'm so sorry for what you're going through, and please be safe, because I didn't want to bother her anymore after that. I mean, and that's the stuff that we as journalists take in, and it's what the community is going through, but it's we have to understand that. And I think, back to this question, I take what I learned in those traumatic experiences and try to understand what's happening in these experiences, on this next fire. Like you said, Anastasia, you covered the mountain fire after mountain fire, years after year. And then you see this big fire in the city, and it's like, okay, what is typical of what's next? What is, like, how to ask those questions.
Right. I mean, after each one, like, just like you said, you ask a better question because you learn from the previous one, right? And so it is only natural to ask officials and whoever is in charge of, making sure that we're safe to the level that we can be. What have you learned from that other experience? Right? I mean, in mass shootings, we talk about Columbine.
Yeah.
What have we learned from Columbine? Are we far enough ahead? And the answer is, unfortunately, no. But I didn't cover Columbine. I covered, from 2006 on.
Yeah.
And every single one informed me to the next question.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately the learning experience.
I think Denver is in a unique situation because I was a reporter in Colorado Springs, so an hour south of Denver, for a little under 2 years. And I think one of the things that I learned while there, and then while covering Aurora and seeing how everything was approached in terms of the shooter, the victims, the conversation was, how these conversations were had, how the shooter was talked about, how that conversation went with the public changed. It shifted over these years. Yes. And I think Denver is, I guess, a unique area to look at because of Columbine and then moving through the years, and how each station really took care in how they described things. And one of the questions that just came in was, under these breaking news situations, a crisis like the fires, how do you ensure accuracy? How do you make sure something's not being sensationalized? So that kind of goes in with it, I think, where
that's a great question.
The conversations that we're having with the public, what we're saying, we have to be careful not to sensationalize.
But let me throw this at you. Who is a judge of what's sensational? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I'm standing there and I watched some of you guys' coverage, you're describing what's happening, what you see in front of you. Is that sensational? To me, you're repeating, you either are paraphrasing what somebody said or you're describing the situation. So what is sensational?
Yeah, and one of the things that I remember saying, I was standing in this neighborhood in front of a couple of homes, and the anchors had said something along the lines of, we've heard it as being described as like a bomb went off. And I said, that is accurate. I'm always careful with my words. I've said that already. Yes. And I don't say that lightly. Right. It looked like a war zone. It looked like international war footage that we've seen on the feeds over the years. It looked like an area that a bomb was just dropped and all of these homes were wiped out. That's exactly what it looked like to me. And so I was saying that on the air, but at the same time, I felt like that is a bold and powerful statement to make.
Yes.
But it was accurate.
Right. But isn't your job also to describe what you're seeing? And from what you and I know, right? Unless you've covered that fire and you've been there in person, there is no way to understand the magnitude of what happened unless you see it. No way.
Yeah.
And so as I was watching it, it took me back to, such a small thing in comparison, right? But let's not compare tragedies. But you know what I'm saying, right? Having been there, I'm like, oh my, I know what they're looking at. I know how it feels. But it doesn't look real, right? Like when you're looking at it, it does not look real. And so your job is to share with people and help them understand the magnitude of what's happening. And if somebody uses those words to describe the situation, I will always quote them, right? And I always, just like you bring context to this.
Right.
Right. And maybe that is the way sort of to, I don't know if it's to minimize that sensationalism, but like just bring context and accuracy to reporting, right? You set that word aside. I'm like, listen, my job here is to explain to you, try to describe to you the indescribable. And some people use words like this.
Yeah, and that's what I said on the air of,
right?
This is not something that I say lightly, but as you look at these images, our camera doesn't capture what you see all around and standing here. Right. And I told our news managers this when I got back to the newsroom, and I've told everyone that I've talked to about it. You don't understand it until you're there. All of the aerial footage that you see, it's such dramatic video, but until you're there, it's hard for it to sink in. I mean, it really is just a difference. We can try and try and try as hard as we can as journalists to document it and show it, but sometimes that doesn't portray the full scale of things.
Maybe here's a thing that just came to my mind. If we have a purpose to describe and use certain words, right? The purpose is right behind you, in front of you, right? That's not sensational. That's giving information, right? When you start being over the top, and you know when you're over the top, right? That maybe is your threshold, but it's an internal threshold, right? Or it's a, I don't know how people, if you write your own leads or anchors change it or whatever, but I always wrote my own things, and then I would look back to make sure that the anchors did not change it.
Right.
To
then go overboard.
Correct. Change the meeting. And the station I worked at was not known for that, right? It was legacy, straight up news station. But I just wanted to make sure that the words did not change, because words matter.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as you are being true to the mission, it's not sensationalizing. It's news.
Yeah. So I have another question here that I think can go for both of you, even though I know Traute is not a journalist. But the question is here: what makes you keep going and come with a positive mindset daily, even when you may come across hard stories? What makes you not give up? And I think Traute, like we talked about, is having, it's about this shared experience. It's about peers who understand. So coming in with that mindset, like, how do you come in to help people through these traumatic events when you know how hard or how defeating it can be?
Yeah, my last organization I worked for was the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And, I get these calls from people who had just lost someone. And, you try to be as compassionate and supportive as you can. But usually after those hard calls, I would have to just take a break and walk around the block and, take some time for myself for that self-care, because, when you're dealing with trauma, it's going to impact you. So, for me, I just realized, I have to take a break and do what I can to maintain, my own self-care. I mean, even today or the last couple of days, I was kind of feeling, it's mental health, there's so much going on and we're trying to support the community. In the last couple of days, I've been feeling a little burnout, to be honest. And so this afternoon, I'm like, okay, Traute, it's time to take a couple of days off, maybe go away. So, by the end of this month, I'm going to do something, because I'm realizing, I am, starting to feel a little burned out, or the effects of, what I'm doing. And so, I work in mental health. I need to recognize. And today I was like, why am I feeling irritable, or, I'm tired? And so I'm like, okay, Traute, I think it's time. You haven't taken some time off in a while. It's time to take a few days and do some self-care. And I think, it's important for all of us to recognize that when we work in a stressful environment, and especially if we've gone through, like Rick, you said you took a week off after, covering the fires. And I think, that's healthy. We need to recognize that, so that we don't keep going and then end up in a mental health crisis, right? So really, just checking in with yourself. We do the best we can, but then, once that job's done or that day's done, what can we do for ourselves to maintain our own mental health?
Yeah. Well, Traute, we appreciate you being here, even with everything. Here we come asking for more of you, right? So thank you for continuing that effort. And Anastasia, same to you. I mean, coming into the work that you do, or coming into the newsroom when you were a working journalist, what was it that kept you coming back, even when we faced those really hard times?
Oh, So many bad days. I honestly, it's gonna sound, it's gonna sound corny. My mission was greater than me. It was. And on really bad days, I was like, oh, it sucks, everything sucks. I mean, just, whatever, name it. It would, the next day, the universe or whatever you believe in would give me this gift of a story that would remind me why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
It was like constant. I'm like, Anastasia, just like sit down, shut up, and just be grateful that you're doing it. Because I got to tell someone's story who maybe was from a marginalized community, or I got to make a very, 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 very small positive impact in their life, or it just I I reminded myself that this was important.
Yeah.
And I know it just sounds like it's words, right? But like I'm also one of those people who saves mementos or cards or emails. And so I would save the times that I would get a positive note. And I'd keep it in my back pocket and I'd reread it. Just to remind myself, like, hey, there was that moment that it really just I did what I was supposed to do and it made a difference in that person's life. So just reminding yourself why you do this job. That's why doing this job for the right reasons is so important and keeps you in, right?
And I've had friends who have saved those notes, and even or outside of news, people who have saved like a positive evaluation from a boss, or just a note that said, "Hey, this was a great assignment that you did a wonderful job on." That I think is so critical for some people to be able to have that and to go back to it. And so that's cool that you saved that. Well, I want to share that for me, that what you said right now, there's the story that like reminds you, right? Some story that makes it feel like this is why I'm doing this. And that on a general scale, over the course of my career, people ask me, like, especially friends who have left the business, like, how are you still doing it? How do you, and I say when I get to that point where I think I've had enough, there is a story that brings me back in and I fall in love with journalism all over again. And here I am, still here. Something sucks me back in. But in terms of the trauma, I can remember a specific point, and this was the day after the San Bernardino terror shooting. And, it was another one of those wall-to-wall events where we were just nonstop coverage, all hands on deck. I had just come to LA a few months prior, so I was still like this rookie here. And I was thrown into the coverage on our morning newscast, so I had to go to bed early and get up early, and I was still adjusting to that life. And that morning, after doing these live shots on the horrific events that happened, the sunrise was so beautiful that day. And it just struck me as like, there's still beauty in the world. And so even though we cover these ugly, horrific things, for me, the reminder of that natural beauty reminds me of, there's still good around us. And then we see these stories of humanity coming together and people who are doing remarkable things. And so it all kind of just brings me back to feeling good about the world around me and the people around me and the people that I get to meet and cover. And so with the fires, I was struggling and struggling and struggling. And then we were driving one morning through a neighborhood, and the neighborhood, all the homes that had burned down along the street, they overlooked the bluffs. And so through the rubble, I saw the sunrise and I could see the coastline, and it was gorgeous.
Oh, man.
And so I told my photographer, turn around, I need to see this. Like, turn around and show me this. And so I went back and I took photos, and it just was this moment that reminded me of how beautiful Southern California is, and that it's still there, even though we're going through this painful, traumatic, difficult time in our lives. And I ended up writing, I don't do this very often. It's not like poetic or anything. And it's posted on my Instagram, which I'll share my account. But I started as writing the caption to this photo, and then I realized I have all this good video. And then I ended up putting together basically a package. I wrote down my thoughts, and it was very moving for me, and it felt so good to put the words in a recording and put it to this video that was so powerful. And it was that moment of the sun will continue to rise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will continue coming back as a reporter as long as I can. And maybe at some point I'm going to hit that wall and not be able to do it anymore, but I'm not there yet. And so I come in reminding myself of the privilege it is to do this work, and the privilege that it is for people to share their world with us, with me specifically, because, I'm the one asking them, can you talk about your trauma? And they do, not always, but the ones that do, it's such a privilege for them to share it with us.
Trust.
Yes.
Right?
And so
so much trust.
Yes. And that's powerful. And so for me, trying to take care of myself, trying to take care of everybody else, having discussions like this, that's how I move forward, so that I can help others still do it, and I can still do it.
I love that. Let me add like one tiny itty bitty thing that I suggest to people who reach out to me for advice similar to this. I said, okay, yeah, you have to do the daily grind. Yes, you have to do whatever the assignment is. But what is it that you're passionate about? Like what subject, what issue? Can I just say that there's a child been crawling back and forth behind you, and I think it's hilarious. And it's been going on back and forth. I'm like, there's such a COVID moment. I'm just like enjoying it so much. And it was like, there's a lot of effort crawling on the ground. I just want to appreciate that it's happening.
It happens,
Look, stories, COVID, that's a separate webinar. But what I tell people, what is it that you love the most? Like what is it that burns you, like the inside? Do you care about mental health? Do you care about equity in education? Do you care about immigration? Do you care about nature, weather, climate, whatever? Can you find time? Can you negotiate with the assignment desk? Can you find some pieces of moments in your day, obviously not during the wall-to-wall coverage, that you can go work on something that lights a fire in you, and that also will impact the community? That's how you keep going. You do something that matters. And I think that works every time.
That's awesome. That is because we all can generally in our work find time to do these side projects, these stories that might take us a while to put together.
Yes.
But you can find the great resources to help you kind of piece it together along the way, even though we have these daily stories that we have to cover that,
news doesn't stop. You gotta go do. But that's
So we have just a few more minutes, and I want to ask attendees, if you have any more questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. But Anastasia, this one is, I think, specific to you. The question is, when was the moment you knew it was time to hang up the microphone? And if you haven't had the moment, a close call or something that made you just kind of come to that decision. And then the question goes on, also, what impact has it had on your mental health?
Such a good question. Must be from a reporter. Sorry, no offense to PR professionals, they're awesome. Okay, it's clear in my mind, right? So thank you for the great questions. I was covering the border, and I was doing it on my own volition, as in like I sought out that job. I took a $15,000 pay cut to do it because I really wanted to understand the best I could what was going on. And I really enjoyed it over a year of doing it. But when the station came back to me and offered me another contract, the contract was garbage. And it wasn't about the money for me. I offered the station, I'm like, listen, I'm like 22 years in, and I'm surrounded by people who are younger than me, who I could see could like really use some mentorships and some help. And I'm not suggesting that I'm the best, I'm not suggesting I'm God's gift to journalism. grew up in Denver where there's just so many names and people who are brilliant. I just felt like I had something to give back.
Mhm.
And all I wanted is an opportunity to have a seat at the editorial table, because I was already asked to contribute. And all I could do is just talk in the morning meetings, right? Like, oh, why don't we do this? And why have we considered going there? What do we ask this question? Why don't we structure the story this way? But those are just suggestions that I was asked to do based on my experience. Why hear myself talk if I can't make a change? So I asked for no additional money. I just wanted to mentor people and to continue doing assignment reporting. And that was too much for the management of the station. I'm like, I'm done. Like if I can't grow and if I can't help others, like what I'm not get, that is when I'm not getting anything more out of it. So it wasn't about the money. It was about growth and making a difference. I guess going back to what lights your fire. And then as if to confirm it, the last week on the job was the week of the Uvalde school shooting, where 19 children were killed and 2 teachers, and that horrific criminal response by law enforcement. It was a Tuesday. My last day was Friday. It was the first time in my career I emailed HR, said, what can I do and what can I say if they call me in? Because I'm in Houston, I'm a few hours away. Not to go. I couldn't. I could no longer ask the grieving parents about their kids. I could no longer stand there and cry with them. I just could not. I did not have the emotional capacity anymore. I didn't, as I like to describe it to people, I didn't have anywhere else to put this trauma, right? So I've sort of like categorized the trauma, and it's in my mind, and you learn this in EMDR therapy, right? Which I did. You sort of, I have it in boxes, and the boxes are closed. And sometimes the boxes open up and I go back through some of the things that are traumatic, but the closed boxes help me live. And I had no more box space available for Uvalde. I was done.
Yeah.
And that was the moment I'm like, I made the right decision. I've only missed it once since I left, which was in 2022. And I deeply, hopefully you guys understand, believe in the profession. That's why I take every opportunity to talk about mental health, and I take opportunity to help people, coach them on writing and presentation, whatever. But I just, that was my lack of growth, and too much trauma.
And, now you have this space that you've created where you get to still contribute to journalism, right? You may not be the one writing, but like you said, you're still kind of doing things to help out, which, that's a great way to still move forward. And we always say once a journalist, always a journalist, to
I
some
can't
degree.
turn this off. It's like on. It's like it's another problem. It needs to be studied,
I'm reading a book right now that is about it's a true crime story, and the detective in it was talking about the boxes, packing it away, and that she's like, I've just never been able to close it to keep it all in. And so some people I can relate to that, how there are some times that I feel like I don't know if my box is going to close today. And times that I know it can, and I'll be fine, and I can move forward, and it's okay. You bring up Uvalde, and one thing that I will point out, I don't know if you read the book that was by the crew from ABC News, 1 Year in Uvalde.
I read an article about it.
Okay.
That they stayed.
And I read it, and I think it was an interesting insight into what they were trying to do as journalists. They didn't want to come in as a network, drop in for the big traumatic event, and then leave. So they stayed, but they talk about building relationships with the families and survivors, and how they tried to get things answered. And so to me, it was an interesting look at how they processed the trauma, how they dealt with sitting in this awful incident for that year. Which, even local stations, it's hard for us to dedicate that much time to one story. I mean, we're still covering the aftermath of the fires, but we're also covering all this other stuff day after day after day after day. So that's another, I think, example of where we can look to see how other journalists are dealing and have dealt with, you know, face-to-face meetings with these grieving families? How do you get them to trust you? And what was interesting is they talked a lot about, you know, you can't go in and fake it because they're going to
No.
know.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know, you can't pretend, like, you've got to really genuinely, passionately care about what you're doing. So I don't see any other questions at the moment. The one thing that I was asked earlier is if you guys are willing to share your contact information. You know, this way we can, you know, our attendees can reach out if they have other follow-up questions or just want to chat or pick our brains and, you know, have some conversations. I know one of them was from a student who's working on a project dealing with journalists and mental health.
I
Should we
just put it
share
to
it in
the host and the panelists. I think I
Oh,
do
you know what?
see it. I think I put it in the wrong place. You want me to copy and paste it somewhere else?
I can drop it in.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, because it defaults to hosts and panel. So we're putting it, you guys, in the chat here. I'm sending it to
and
everyone.
I'm also super easy to find. I mean, if you cannot find me, then we need to help you find me, and then we need to help you with some basic Googling.
And we're journalists, so we should know how to find people.
Exactly. So I'm like on LinkedIn, and my information, my contact information is like openly there on LinkedIn for everyone. So yeah.
And I'm happy to be a resource as well. May Mental Health Awareness Month is coming up.
Yes.
If anyone's doing any stories or needs any information, I'm happy to provide any information. We do have a big walk coming up at LA State Historic Park on May 10th. Telemundo and KNBC, I know, will be there for sure. So we invite anyone else. Last week, the mayor was our keynote. We've invited the governor. It's the largest mental health event in LA County during May. So hope you can join us.
And, you know, the reason I reached out is because I did a NAMI walk years and years ago. And so that's when I learned about the organization and was like, they can help us. I know it.
And, you know, I just realized that, do you know Chris Blatchford? He used to work, I think, at KCBS and at Fox.
Oh, yeah.
He's one of our members, and he actually runs a support group. So, you know, he could potentially be a resource down the road as well.
Awesome. Well, listen, you guys have been fantastic. I think this is a great conversation, and I know we can continue to, you know, have these long conversations. But attendees, feel free to reach out to any of us, especially if you're struggling and want to talk, or if you just have questions and want to learn and grow. We're here for you. That's what SPJ is all about. You know, advancing the world of journalism. So I appreciate everybody's time for being with us. And, you know, I actually have to be at work at 1:30 in the morning because of the storm coming in. So tomorrow's going to be interesting. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, but, you know, this was so important that I will sacrifice the sleep. So I love what I do, and I love people who do this work as well and who help us with mental health. So thank you guys so much. Really, really, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you so immensely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, and everyone for all you do. You definitely have a lot of respect.
Yes, thanks guys for joining. Yes. All right, go to sleep. Have a great day.
Yeah, have a great night. Thank you guys.
All right,
take care,
thanks everyone. Thanks.